chronic diseases are caused by the food we eat or don't eat and can be reversed with simple dietary changes. All right, up next, give a big KetoCon 2022 welcome to Dr. AnthonyChaffee.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming out. This is my first KetoCon, it's my first talk of this nature in general, so it's very bold of the managers to put me up on the main stage. Hopefully I don't mess it up. So I'm talking about why we are carnivores and obviously why this matters as well. So when we're talking about carnivore, herbivore, or omnivore, it's important to sort of define our terms. We get told that we're carnivores or maybe we're omnivores. This wasn't really contentious for a long time. We were told that we're apex predators, top of the food chain. That really means that we're carnivores. We're eating all the animals below us on the food chain. What is an omnivore? Any realistic, usable definition of the word omnivore to me means one of two things. Either you can eat plants and meat indiscriminately, or and get equal nutrition from them, or at least no harm, or you can, there are things in meat that you have to eat, so you have to eat some meat, and there are things in plants that you have to eat because you can't get them from meat. We don't fall into either of these two categories. There are things in meat that we have to have that we cannot get from plants. There is nothing in plants that we have to have that we cannot get from meat if you're only eating meat. Okay, so what is the evidence for this? There's actually just a ton of evidence for this. We look at it from all sorts of different parameters, biologically, anatomically, evolutionarily, different populations currently and historically who exclusively ate meat and thrived doing so, metabolically as well. And the last one is really botanically, the fact that plants are living organisms, they like to stay living organisms, and all living things can defend themselves. And while an animal can run away or fight back, plants can't, so they use other sort of defense mechanisms. One of those is defense chemicals. So biologically, if you look at our gastrointestinal tract, we are primates, right? So we have a similar GI tract. We have specific differences. Our stomach pH is very low. It's about 1.3 to 1.5. This is where we see like vultures and carrion animals that really need to contend with a lot of bacterial load. We don't see this in herbivores. Usually they're around the 5 or 6 mark, more neutral. We have a longer small bowel, and we have a shorter large bowel. This is the opposite in herbivores. We also have a particular difference in our appendix. It's just little vestigial organ, right? So vestigial meaning that it used to do something millions of years ago, and now it does nothing. Well, millions of years ago, it was this 4-foot-long cecum. It was this blind pouch that fiber would pack into, and that's what would break down. The bacteria there would break this down into short-chain fatty acids, which is what herbivores who eat fiber get the majority of their nutrition from, is actually still fat. So fat makes the animal kingdom go round. Unfortunately, we don't have that, or maybe fortunately, we don't have the ability to break down fiber to get fat. So we need to get it from somewhere else. And so we have 5 organs all working in concert just to absorb fat. So the stomach starts the breakdown process, the liver creates bile, the gallbladder stores it, the pancreas secretes enzymes that break this down further, and then the bile emulsifies these fatty acids, and this gets taken up by the small intestine. So we would not have 5 organs all working together just to absorb fat unless that was very, very important, okay? And it is. And we can't break down fiber to get this fat. So we have to get this from the animals that have already done the hard work for us. The cows and the other herbivores that have the ability to break down fiber and get the fat out of it. Now we're just using them as a filter. They also filter out the different toxins as well. So it's not just that it's not useful to us, it actually causes harm. So you actually get colon disease called diverticulosis, which is a failure and an outpouching of your distal colon. And this it causes all sorts of disease. You can get surgery, you could die. And the only things that have been even associated with this are higher fiber intake and more bowel motions a day. So you're overworking this organ and eventually it fails. Just like your heart can fail, your colon can fail as well. Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, these sorts of diseases are generally exacerbated in the extreme by eating fibrous foods. And when you put people on an elemental diet, which is basically just the constituent nutrients, macro, micro, that you need without any of the extra fluff, that has a better efficacy in getting people into remission and staying in remission than steroids. Okay, so simple dietary changes can seriously affect people's lives. Okay, and just to jump back a bit, why is this important? The reason is that we are animals, and so we will have a common diet. We'll have something that is optimal for our biology, a species-specific diet. Now, any zookeeper can tell you that if you feed an animal something that it doesn't eat in the wild, something it didn't evolve on, it gets sick. But what does it get sick with? It gets obesity, heart disease, liver disease, diabetes, cancer, arthritis, autoimmune issues, the whole gambit. Dogs and cats are known carnivores, and yet we feed them grain and plant-based kibble. They get the same diseases. We get the same diseases. Veterinarians are now saying that animals have a huge uptick in human diseases. Well, these human diseases like diabetes, like heart disease, like cancer, don't exist in nature and in the animal kingdom by and large that we've seen. But they were also not called human diseases, they were called Western diseases not that long ago. This is because the Western civilizations that had agriculture and would come to Australia, come to North America, they noticed that the people there would not get these diseases of the West. Okay, so now we've just gotten so used to it, we just think this is aging, this is normal, these are human diseases. They're not. This is from inappropriate diet. So anatomically, people talk about like, oh, well, we have these flat teeth. You can look at them, and that means we're an herbivore, just like a horse has flat teeth. But that's not what flat teeth means. It's not like just flat in the front. Flat means planar, and it can slide across each other like a millstone and grind down this fiber. Okay, so that's what flat teeth are. Now we have bicuspid teeth. If you clench down and try to move your jaw side to side, it's not going to go anywhere. That's because we don't have flat teeth. But we do have primate teeth. We have similar teeth to other primates, but they have specific carnivorous adaptations. They didn't turn into big fangs and claws or anything like that because we don't kill things with our mouths. We didn't need to develop that. So in fact, we were eating meat, which is softer, and that doesn't take big teeth to do. So we're eating softer and softer food, so our teeth are getting smaller, our jaws are getting smaller, our muscles of mastication, or temporalis muscle there, is getting smaller and smaller. If you look at the gorilla here, most of that head is temporalis muscle. Most of that is the muscles of mastication. Massive jaw, massive teeth, actually big fangs. They don't eat meat, they use those defensively. So we're not chewing on sticks all day like a gorilla, so we don't need those big, massive jaws. You look at our shoulders. We have rotational shoulders. We can overarm throw. We can throw rocks. We can throw spears. This is used in hunting. So an average man can throw a baseball 60 miles an hour. A chimpanzee, best they could do is probably 20 miles an hour. They don't have that rotational capacity in their shoulders, and that's for hunting. Then you have the orientation of your eyes. This is very, very typical of predator versus prey. You have forward-facing eyes. You see in 3 dimensions, and you can lock in on a target and go and get it. Okay, that's very typical of predator vision. And then prey has a much wider range, and so they can see dangers on each side of them. Okay, and we have those forward-facing predator eyes. Some people will talk about color vision, like, oh well, this is more herbivorous to look at different colored fruits and things like that, and that's fine. Maybe that's where that came from in our herbivorous past, but you don't lose a trait unless there's an evolutionary survival advantage to losing that trait. And in fact, some people have. There are people that are colorblind or red-green colorblind. That actually helps them see in low light scenarios and actually see animals hiding in bushes and foliage and things like that. So actually, there are those adaptations. So evolutionarily, about 6 to 8 million years ago, our ancestors split off from other primates by eating meat. They started eating meat, started eating more and more meat, more and more meat, started getting more and more adaptations to our current iteration, okay? One of those was the teeth getting smaller, jaws getting smaller, but also our brains getting bigger because we didn't have the physical characteristics to take down a large game with just our teeth and our claws. We didn't have them. So we had to develop our brain. Luckily for us, we didn't have those physical characteristics. So we developed our brain. We developed tools. We started figuring things out. So the smarter people that could figure out how to take down an animal that outclassed us by every physical metric allowed us to evolve into what we are today and use tools, develop tactics. And that's why we live in houses and lions don't, and I'm happy for that. I'd rather have that than the claws. So we started using tools actually pretty early on. There's evidence going back millions of years that they were using pound stones. They take this rock and smash open the skull of a dead animal, and they would get at the brain. That was one of our earliest forms of meat nutrition, very nutritious brain. About 3.3 million years ago, we started getting the first work tools. This is something that Dr. Bill Schindler will be able to tell you guys a lot more about. But this developed and continued on, okay? Then you get to the ice ages. The ice ages started about 2.5 to 3 million years ago. We're actually still in an ice age. That's why we still have polar ice caps. Those didn't exist about 2.5 to 3 million years ago. When that happened, obviously ice is going to kill things, and it took out a lot of the plant life, took out a lot of the animal life that survived on those plants. The only things that were surviving in these ice times were the big megafauna like the mammoths, and then the carnivores and the predators that were hunting them. This forced a genetic selection for those early humans that were already hunting animals. They were already eating meat. They had tools and they were able to survive. And so the other ones that weren't as adapted, they died off, okay? There's a thing called the stable isotope study where you take a look at certain isotopes in the fossils that you find. And this is very clear evidence for what these animals were eating at the time. So you can see a lower rating would be herbivores, or just eating plants, and then you see animals that eat the animals that eat plants, and they have a higher rating. And then you go up the food chain of predators eating predators that are eating herbivores, you're having an even higher carnivore rating. Early humans and, early Homo sapiens even, and Neanderthal, like 50,000 years ago and beyond, they had a higher carnivore rating than other carnivores alive at the same time, lions, foxes, wolves, and so forth, because we're eating the lions and the foxes as well. So we actually were, again, top of the food chain, apex predators. Apex predators don't graze. Lions don't eat grass, and I've never seen a great white shark eat kelp for roughage. We did the stable isotope study with ancient Egyptians. So there's tons and tons and tons of mummies in mummified remains in Egypt, actually millions. And so there's a lot of good information there. Found out that this was the breadbasket of the ancient world, and so obviously they're eating a lot of grains, eating a lot of bread. But they also had a lot of health issues that you can see by this statue. Even their artwork reflected the fact that they had gynecomastia in men and pot bellies. We see that they had atherosclerosis in some of these people, and the thought was, because they're first looking at pharaohs, that these are very wealthy elite, so they could afford fatty meat. No, we actually see this in all populations, and we see that through the stable isotope studies that the commoners and the royalty were actually eating the same thing. They were eating a lot of grains, and they were having the same problems. There's an old ancient Egyptian proverb that goes, half of what you eat feeds you, the other half feeds your doctor, right? So it's already thousands of years ago, they're already aware that the things that you ate actually were causing disease. So there was a large study that came out of the University of Tel Aviv in Israel, and again looked at multiple different parameters, including the stable isotope research, and they concluded that humans were hypercarnivorous apex predators for at least 2 million years, and we were mostly eating the meat of large animals. Okay, so again, apex predators. Okay. You look at the fossil record. Our teeth, crooked teeth, small jaws. These aren't actually genetic. Okay, this is actually malnutrition. So anyone who has kids and doesn't want to pay for braces, pay for meat now, right? Because before the agricultural revolution, people had perfectly straight teeth, big jaws, well developed, always had their wisdom teeth fully erupted, and they didn't get cavities either. Okay, I mean, do you see a bunch of cavities in the wild, different animals that have crooked teeth? No, it's not really. It's really just humans and maybe dogs and cats if we feed them the wrong thing. We know now from dentistry journals and the research done there that this is actually from malnutrition. So it's generally like a vitamin K2 deficiency, which does not exist in plants. You have to get this from meat. But K2, K1, D3, and calcium all play for jaw development, tooth development, and oral health. And this is something you can actually date these. If you say something before or after the agricultural revolution, you can actually tell just by their dental record. We've actually gotten a lot shorter as well. A lot of these big mammoth hunters that were just eating just tons of meat all the time, the fossil record shows that they were actually on average about like 6'2" or higher on average, okay? So the average adult male in America is 5'9", and it goes down from there in other civilizations. That's not genetic. That is environmental. That means that we're not developing to our genetic potential because we're not eating what we're biologically supposed to eat. This goes into brain size as well. Again, because we've had to figure out how to take down these animals, we've had to get smarter. And so you can see over the course of millions and millions of years, our brains have slowly gotten bigger. And then here at around 2 to 2.5 million years ago, right when those ice ages hit and we went full carnivore, that's when we are catapulted into our final leg of evolution, into Homo habilis, the first true human, who were full carnivores and continued on as full carnivores for millions of years. And you can see the dramatic rise in our brain sizes. But then look at this. Right at the end here is sharp decline down, okay? That coincides with the agricultural revolution. Our brains are now 11% smaller on average than they were before the agricultural revolution. That is not genetic. That is environmental. That is through lack of nutrition, okay? So we're done at this point. We've already developed, but our kids and our friends' children, they still have a chance. And so if they aren't eating what they're biologically adapted to eat, what they're supposed to eat, they won't develop into what they're supposed to be. So again, this is about optimal nutrition for optimizing your life, optimizing your health, and specifically for optimizing development, because you don't get a second chance at development. So all the different cultures, we see there's just endless examples. I'm just going to name a few. Native Americans in the plains, they would exclusively eat buffalo generally. Maybe they'd have some berries or something like that, here and there, but really maybe what they ate is buffalo. They would drive the herd over the cliff. They would crash to the bottom. They would carve up these bodies. They would dry them out. They would make pemmican. They would eat this throughout the year. They're very, very healthy. There are plenty of records. There's the Dr. J.H. Salisbury of the Salisbury steak. He lived with the Native Americans, studied them, and found that these guys were living to be 110, 115 years old back in the 1800s, before modern medicine, before antibiotics. And they were very, very fit and healthy 110, 115-year-olds. These were Stone Age nomads living out in the wild with a pack on their back, following the buffalo herds day in and day out. Right? They weren't just sitting in a nursing home turning to dust slowly over 40 years. Right? These were very healthy people. Okay? The longest lived Native American on record was the chief White Wolf, and he's reported to live 137 years. Okay? And everyone says, like, okay, well, they're just saying that, but they don't have an official government record or whatever, but these are their records. But this is a consistent pattern that you see in these populations. Now, that may seem far-fetched until you realize that we've known as geneticists for the last 20 years that genetically and chromosomally, we are designed to live 120 years on average, okay? Meaning that if you just stay out of your own way and don't do anything wrong, just don't mess up, you should live 120 years without doing anything special. And yet we're dying in our 60s and 70s, which is literally middle age. So people say, oh, does it make that big of a difference? Like, yeah, I think 50, 60 years off your lifespan is a major difference, and the health along the way. So, they say like, oh, it couldn't possibly living to be 110 or 115, but actually, that's normal. That should be normal. I mean, something's going wrong if you don't make it to 120. Genghis Khan and the Mongol horde, these guys were famously carnivores. They just drank horse blood, ate horse meat, some dairy products, usually fermented dairy products as well. And they would go 5 days without eating, and then they'd stuff themselves with 10 pounds of horse meat. This was very advantageous when you're doing a conquest across 2 continents, because they weren't as restricted as others. They were much better nourished as well. And so they took over the largest contiguous empire that has ever existed on Earth. It's the only eclipsed by the British Empire, and that was obviously a naval power. This is one big chunk, most of Asia, much of Europe, and they just subsisted just on meat. The Inuits up north, obviously there aren't any plans for these guys to eat anyway, even if they wanted to, which in fact they don't. We have plenty of documentation from early explorers and settlers in North America just marveling at how the ones living more southern wouldn't eat plants even in the summer. And they said, like, okay, I get it, like during the winter, everything's iced over, they can't grow anything anyway, but surely they could live off the bounty of the land in the summer, which is always a funny thing to say. But yeah, so they did not want to. Now they may know which plants to eat medicinally, they may know which ones they can eat safely to stave off starvation, but by and large, they just ate meat if they had meat, and that's a common theme that you'll see in a lot of these populations. Then the Maasai, these are famous meat eaters. They drink blood, they drink milk, they eat meat, they don't eat anything else. These guys look like Olympic athletes. They're absolutely, very, very fit and active people. In the 1980s, they thought, wow, these guys are eating so much meat and fat, but they're so lean, they're so strong, they can run forever. It must be that they're exercising so much. And so they studied it, and they found that, actually, they're only exercising 1.6 times more than the average sedentary American. So like, okay, we don't know what's going on with these guys. It must be genetic or something. Australian Aboriginals, again, these guys were hunters. They were carnivores. You look at missionaries, writings from missionaries, you look at the writings of early explorers, they always talk about the diet. They only eat meat, they only eat fatty meat, and they knew which plants they could eat if they needed to, but when they had meat, they ate meat, and they didn't get the diseases of the West, right? Except now. I practice in Australia at the moment, and the Australian Aboriginals, when I first got there, I was told, when you see one of these patients, whatever it says their birth date is, add 20 years to that. Because these people just age so much faster, they get these diseases so much faster. When I was around 7, I remember hearing a story about how, when Native Americans were eating a Western diet, they were 4 times as likely to get obesity, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and the rest. And I remember thinking to myself, well, doesn't that mean the food is causing the disease? Because if they don't eat the food, they don't get the disease. And we eat the food and we get the disease, we just get it at a lower rate. What's a non-Western diet? What are they eating that we're not, and vice versa? I didn't know it at the time, but they were just pure high-fat carnivores. The same is true of the Australian Aboriginals. Now that they're on a Western diet, their health has absolutely been destroyed. Herodotus, the father of history, very interesting guy, wrote a lot of things that are worth looking into. One thing that I think in particular is good to talk about here is an interaction between the king of Ethiopia and the emissary from the Persian Empire, where the king of Ethiopia asked, okay, what do you guys eat and how long do you normally live? And they say, well, we eat bread and we eat grains and we normally live around 70 years, okay? It's about 2,500 years ago. And the king of Ethiopia just sort of laughed at this and said, well, no wonder you live such short lives if all you eat is dirt. Because we only eat the meat from our cattle, we only drink the milk from our livestock, and we would live 120 years, sometimes more than that. And that might seem braggadocious, and I'm sure many people thought that, but again, that's exactly what we know as geneticists we should be living to. So if he was just bragging, if he was just full of it, he picked a very, very curious number, okay? Exactly what we know we should be living to. Metabolically, in biochemistry, we talk about a fed state and a fasting state. I think this is completely wrong. I think that our so-called fasting state is our primary metabolic state. That's where all of our heavy machinery comes to bear, and that's the primary metabolic state of most animals in the wild as well, including humans who are living as carnivores. I'm sort of preaching to the choir here at KetoCon, talking about how carbohydrates are bad, but they really are. And when you eat carbohydrates, your blood sugar goes up. High blood sugar causes direct damage to your body, and in a defensive pattern, your body increases insulin to get this stuff out of there. Okay? But insulin forces energy into cells, it doesn't allow it to come out of cells. And so now you've locked down your fat cells, you cannot use them anymore, and you've shut down your metabolism. Okay? It also blocks leptin, which is secreted from your fat stores, and this goes to your brain to tell you how much energy you have. Do you need to keep eating or not? And so your brain can't see the leptin, your blood sugar is dropping, and you get panicked and say, oh, you have to eat, you have to eat, you have to eat. So now you're causing people to overeat as well. So you switch over into a fat storage metabolism instead of a fat burning metabolism, and you're constantly telling yourself that you have to eat more. Okay, so this is a recipe for disaster. It's also implicated in cancer. The metabolic theory of cancer is something that's gaining more ground. Professor Thomas Seyfried from Boston College is a very interesting guy. I encourage everyone to look up his work. I just interviewed him again for my podcast, and I'll be publishing that in a week or so. he shows quite convincingly, and he has over 150 peer-reviewed publications on the subject, that cancer is actually derived from a metabolic issue of damage to the mitochondria. When the mitochondria, which are your energy production organelles in your cells, when they get damaged, they can't go through oxidative phosphorylation, right? So it's aerobic metabolism. All of a sudden that goes into this alternate metabolisms and goes into a fermentive state. So it uses a lot of glucose because its glucose burden is high. And this is why cancer cells take in about 400 times the amount of glucose into the cells to use this. But they cannot run on ketones. And so when you go into a state of ketosis, you are limiting the amount of blood sugar available to these cancer cells. And they can't run on the ketones anyway. So this is a huge leg up when you're fighting off cancer. And yeah, this is very interesting research. There are centers that are already using this, such as Paleomedicina, have been using a keto or carnivore-based approach for cancer treatment and other sorts of treatments for 10 to 15 years. And even places like Cedars-Sinai have picked up a ketogenic approach to cancer treatment. So plants trying to kill you, okay? Again, these things use defense chemicals in order to stop predators from eating them, okay? Every living thing has a defense, as I said, okay? And we know this inherently, right? You get lost out in the woods, you run out of food. You can't just eat any random plant, right? Most of them will make you very sick or even kill you, okay? So why are these animals eating that? Well, that's because plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more poisonous, so less and less animals can eat them, so that they can survive and thrive. And then animals becoming more and more adapted to specific poisons in specific plants so that they can eat that plant and digest the toxins safely so they can survive and thrive, okay? So this is why there are 340,000 plants in the world, and koalas eat one, pandas eat one, cows, horses, other grazing animals eat grass, that's it. You know, the leaves that a giraffe eats are different from the leaves that a deer eats, those are different from the leaves that a gorilla eats, and so on. You mix those leaves around, they all get sick or die, okay? And that's because you can have this adaptation to specific poisons, but all the rest of them will kill you. So if you think about it, all plants are poisonous. It's just that certain animals have evolved the ability to break down specific poisons safely so that they can eat them. But if they eat other plants, they will die as well. A cow will die from eating most plants. Most plants will kill most animals. So what are some of these? We have toxins. These cause direct damage. They can screw with you metabolically or physically. They can tear up your gastrointestinal tract. There's things like water hemlock that blocks the GABA receptors in your brain and makes it impossible for your brain to calm down your neurons, okay? So these are only going to excite. That's called a seizure. And so you're going to have intractable seizures and you will die from this. You cannot stop these things. You'll die within a few minutes, okay? You have phytohormone or phytoestrogens, hormone disruptors. You know, we know about this with like soy. 3 ounces of soy has about 10 times the amount of phytoestrogens as a fertile woman will make estrogen in a day. About 8 glasses of soy milk a day is enough estrogen to grow breasts in a man, okay? So this actually causes a lot of problems in our body. There are nutrient blockers, such as protease inhibitors from soy and protein. These block the different enzymes that come out of our pancreas that help break down and absorb the food that we eat. And so when you're eating soy, you're eating protein, you're eating wheat, you're getting these protease inhibitors. And so it doesn't matter if you have 30 grams of protein that is coming in on this shake or whatever you're eating, you're not going to absorb that because your body's being blocked by this. So the plant's saying, hey, you're gonna eat me, I'm gonna screw with you. That's how that works. Photosensitivity, a lot of the plants make you more sensitive to UV light, make you burn a lot more easily. There's a thing called celery dermatitis, which is if you eat a lot of celery or handle celery, you will just be much more sensitive to sunlight. You will absolutely scorch in the sun. The oil and limes, because these are unripe fruit, it doesn't want you to touch it. That can soak in your skin. You can actually get second-degree burns from sunlight. It actually happened to my younger brother. This is also why you usually don't see very tan vegans. And then cyanogenic. There are 2,500 different plants that use cyanide and produce cyanide as a defense mechanism. So almonds are among them, bitter almonds, but also things like cassava, which are one of the staple diets in the third world. If you don't process cassava properly, the amount of cyanide will kill you, okay? And so generally eating plants, it comes from privation. You've had to do it because you've been poor, you couldn't eat anything else. Even if cyanide doesn't kill you, it's still causing damage to your body, and long term, even low doses of cyanide can damage your thyroid and cause neurological impairment. Nightshades as well, these are things like tobacco and belladonna, but also potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers. Okay, these are all in the nightshade family. They all create or secrete solanine and other toxins, which can be very harmful. Even today, 70 people a year worldwide die from eating potatoes. Okay, potatoes, right? Put that in contrast, put that in perspective. 6 people a year die from eating from shark attacks. Okay, so potatoes are worse than sharks, right? Gluten, this is something that a lot of people know about, but it's not just bad for people with celiac. This damages everyone's gut lining. This causes damages and breaks in the cells in your gut lining, causes leaky gut, some of you people may have heard of. This allows things to physically pass through that wouldn't be allowed in before, things like bacteria, things like other toxins like lectins that will cause more harm in your body. They're also a protein, and about 80% of the protein in wheat is gluten. And this is not available for us. There's no bioavailability, really, to speak of gluten. So if you say like, oh, I've got all this protein, from this thing containing wheat, like, no, you didn't actually. You got maybe a fifth of that. Lectins, there's a large variety of lectins commonly found in beans. If you don't prepare beans, soak them in water, boil them for a certain amount of time, the lectins in there can kill you, okay? This is the plant telling you, back off. Beans are seeds are a plant's baby. Everything protects its babies more than anything. This is generally where you'll find a higher concentration of poison is in the seeds or the beans. So lectins have a similar action when they get in through these gaps in your gut lining. They can cause all sorts of mischief. They can bind onto your insulin receptors, and it can actually put you into a fat-storing, low metabolic state, even if you're not eating any carbohydrates, or even if you're keto, but you're eating things with lectins in them, and you have leaky gut, you are going to have this insulin response as well. It's also implicated in autoimmune diseases through molecular mimicry. Your body recognizes these things like, this shouldn't be here. It starts attacking it with antibodies. Those antibodies, in some people, are similar, the lectins are similar enough to certain parts of their body that those antibodies attack them. But if you remove these lectins, you get these things out of your body stops attacking them, and the spillover stops attacking your body. So this is why when people go onto a carnivore diet in particular, autoimmune issues just melt away. I've yet to see someone who didn't respond exceptionally well with an autoimmune condition from a carnivore diet. Generally, Crohn's and ulcerative colitis will have full resolution on biopsy within 3 months on a pure carnivore diet from what I've seen. Okay, so again, we've covered all any way you look at this, we really are carnivores, okay? That's just the kind of animal we are, and the reason that that's important is because when you eat outside of your species-specific diet, you get harm. You're either harmed because you're nutrient deprived and you're not going to develop properly, you're not going to live appropriately, or you're causing direct harm to yourself, from the plant toxins and other things. Some people say, well, what about different people? Different people are adapted to different things. Maybe one diet's good for this person, maybe not that person. I mean, to me, that really doesn't make any sense, because we are one species. Homo sapiens sapiens, okay? So we will have a common diet, something that is optimal, something that is the best. Now, maybe there's some people that have more resistances to inappropriate diets because they had the agricultural revolution in their background, and they would have more resistance than, say, the Aboriginals, okay? They would get less sick, but that doesn't mean it's good for them. It just means it's less bad, okay? And, I always ask this of people who say that. It's like, you find me an example in nature of 2 members of the same species that have different optimal diets. I have yet to get an answer on that one. So we are one species. We have a common diet, okay? And so if the Inuits are carnivores, I would say that we're all carnivores as well. And I've certainly never seen a cave painting of lettuce, okay? All right, thank you very much. I think I have time for some questions as well, if people wanted to come up, or not. We don't have to. Next to someone? Yeah, that should be it. you want to come up?
Is your family carnivore too?
Is my family carnivore too? Yeah, most of them are. My parents went on first, and they just saw the results I was getting, and I was just, when I was really digging into the research several years ago, I was, I was just really fascinated by this, and talking to them about it, and they thought that was interesting. They saw the results, and so they gave it a try and stayed with it. And my brother has as well. My girlfriend Elle, she's turned carnivore as well. And just people around me, when they talk to me to find out these things, most people ask questions, and I generally have the answers. And so yeah, most people are. Yeah.
More pictures of your fridge.
More pictures of my fridge. Yeah. There's like a few, just chopped up bodies in there. Yeah.
There's a lot of studies that show the beneficial of full carnivore diet to the gut health and all the diversity of
So there aren't any that talk about specifically carnivore diet, but there are with elemental. Yeah, so you're saying that, are there any studies showing carnivore diet is beneficial to gut health? Not specifically carnivore. This is sort of a new area, but anyway, there are studies that talk about meat being beneficial to you. There's a Harvard study. There's another study with 175 different countries looking at them. They found that more meat you ate, the longer you lived, the better health you were in. So there's interesting things being done specifically with gut health, not carnivore specifically, but there are plenty that have to do with elemental diet, which is just breaking down and just getting the macros and micros that you need and nothing else, and also a fasting mimicking diet, which is, as we all know, is just a ketogenic diet. These show better efficacy than all the really expensive, horrible on your body medications that we have for things like Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. So there is information that diet is extremely beneficial, and studies that show that, not specifically for carnivore though, but I'm sure there will be. And I've certainly seen that in practice. Sorry, speak up. Oh, carnivore? No, absolutely not. No, carnivore absolutely doesn't have any negative impact. There's people that say that eating meat will contribute to colon cancer and problems with your gut. That is absolutely not borne out by the evidence. There was one epidemiological study that showed a very slight correlation with red meat and bowel cancer. That's been thoroughly debunked. We don't find even a relationship at all between red meat and bowel cancer. And people talk about how fiber is so good for our gut, and yet it causes these diseases, and yet that's the only thing associated with diverticulosis. And yet when general surgeons will remove part of the bowel, or you have diverticulitis, an infection of diverticulosis, they rest the bowel. How do you rest the bowel? You put somebody on a low fiber diet because you want low residue, so you don't want a lot going through that. Okay, if fiber was so good for your gut, why isn't it helping in those times as well? So no, that's meat will not damage your gut at all. Meat is our appropriate diet. It is going to be the best thing for you in any aspect of your life, at any age, at any description in your life. Yeah. Yeah. I think you first.
Carnivore and MS.
Carnivore and MS. So there aren't too many studies, but I've anecdotally seen a number of people benefit from MS. Yeah, absolutely. All autoimmune issues. I've yet to see an autoimmune issue that doesn't benefit greatly. I've several people that I know of personally. A close friend of mine had MS, went carnivore, and basically resolved within a couple months. And I've had a number of patients as well that have benefited from that. Yeah.
Can being on carnivore cause you to be in a metabolic acidosis?
No, you wouldn't go into ketoacidosis. No.
Not ketoacidosis, but more metabolically acidosis.
Not really. No, your body very tightly controls these biochemical markers. So your pH is going to stay between 7.35 and 7.45, or you will know about it. You will get very, very sick. Yeah. So it's very tightly controlled. Yeah.
Can you hear the microphone?
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
All right, perfect. I just wanted to say that the piece on healing chronic disease really hit home. I had ulcerative colitis for 6 years, completely healed it through a carnivore diet. Started going to the bathroom 20 to 30 times a day. Within a week, I literally was down to going to the bathroom once or twice a day. So literally life-changing stuff.
Oh, that's
my question for you is, like when I would speak to my GI about what I was doing, he would every time that I would see him, he would say, "Oh, you look better. What are you doing differently?" And I would tell him, "Look, the only thing I'm changing is I'm eating more meat. I'm cutting out all the processed foods." and he didn't really have an opinion on it. So how do we get GIs and people in Western medicine to come around to a carnivore meat-based approach to eating?
Yeah, you just got to talk to them, and like, I've run into gastroenterologists that were like, like, oh my God, how can you be saying this to people? Like, literally, I got threatened to report me to the medical board in Australia, and I'm like, look, there are, dozens studies, that all show what I'm saying is true. They're like, why don't you know about me? You're supposed to be the expert. This isn't even my field, And it's just like, so who's going to report who,
Yeah.
And so you can get these studies, and if you grab me there, I can probably shoot you a bunch of the different studies and just say, hey, look, there's all this evidence that diet really helps, and this is probably something you should think about with your other patients as well. Yeah, it's all evidence-based is the only thing. Some people will listen, other people won't. Most doctors who see your results and go, Jesus, okay, what's going on? They're going to be interested. And so if you tell them, hey, this is what I'm doing, and I think this is what it is, and here's some evidence for that, I think they'll be pretty interested.
Have you experimented with other things like bone broth, organ meats, just outside of just the muscle meat that you found to be helpful with patients with gut issues as well?
I find, like organ meats are fine, if you want to eat them, and especially if you're eating like a mixed diet, you actually do need more nutrients. But just by and large, I don't really think you need to eat organs. I don't eat organs. If you want bone broth, that's fine. I don't think that it particularly, it certainly wouldn't hurt to have bone broth, I don't think, but I don't think it necessarily gives much more of a benefit, besides just enjoyment. But from a healing standpoint, it's as much to do with what you're not eating as to do with what you are eating. You eat the meat that gives you the energy and the nutrition that you need, but you're not eating the things that are causing direct harm, and that's a big one in autoimmune.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Dr. Chaffee. I'm curious what your take is on raw milk versus pasteurized milk. Do you have a stance on that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, raw milk's going to be 1,000 times better, obviously. I tend to avoid dairy just in general. Not that I have anything in particular against it. And if I were to drink milk, it would really be the raw milk, and I like it, But I actually probably like it too much. I sort of get that carb craving with the lactose. And I'm like, oh my God, I want more of this. And so I'll just polish off like a gallon of this stuff at a time. I'm like, okay, I don't want to do that. And so it does have enough lactose that it can raise your insulin levels, and it can derail your metabolism. So that's what I worry about there. But yeah, absolutely. If you were going to do dairy, I would absolutely do raw dairy and fermented dairy as well. Is a very good option.
Thank you.
No problem.
So you're
Hi, I'm a huge proponent of the carnivore diet. I used it to heal a pretty wicked brain injury, so I know the benefits of it. I'm also a functional nutrition coach, and I have some really challenging clients, terminal cancer, brain tumors, lung cancer, things like that. I've been introduced to the Paleo Medicina people in Budapest, Hungary. I'm wondering what your opinion is on their protocol using only four-legged animals of carnivore versus two-legged, like poultry items, and the efficacy of that.
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I haven't looked at their particular protocol specifically. I'm actually due to speak with Dr. Clemens in the coming sort of weeks. We're trying to set something up, so I'll definitely dig into that. As far as nutritionists go for it, it has been said in different circles, like even Dr. Salisbury in the 1800s talked about how beef was absolutely the best, red meat was going to be the best, it was going to be the most nutritious, and lamb was like a distant second. So really, like grass-fed beef was the best way to go. Particularly with people with autoimmune diseases, they seem to have a problem with certainly dairy, and you get like the different proteins can just cause a little more inflammation, and then even chicken and pork. That may have to do with what the animal is eating, and if they're not eating their natural diet, they're not necessarily going to be as healthy as they can be. But I think that I've certainly noticed that when people are on just beef, and especially grass-fed beef, they do a lot better than even the other meats. If you want to get really fine-tuned there, and if you have someone who has a serious issue like cancer in particular, or autoimmune issues, it is better just to really go for the gold. And so that may be why they're doing that. But yeah, I'll look into that though.
Okay, great. Secondarily, I've seen huge progress with my clients. I've got somebody that was non-ambulatory, and he's now out of a wheelchair.
Oh, that's amazing.
Just in 4 months when he was supposed to be dead within 6 months. So
Wow.
he's doing great. But outside of that, I know there are certain cancers that proliferate with a higher load of protein, so I tend to do a therapeutic level. Do you have any opinion on the better meats? And I know beef is one of them, but it's finding that fine balance of where I'm suggesting a certain level of protein and fat with different cancers. Is there any rhyme or reason to that you can speak to today?
As far as cancer is concerned, I don't know of any specific ratios, but just in general, you see animals in the wild, including humans, getting around 70 to 80% of their calories from fat. And that seems to be a good range. And I know paleomedicine actually tries to go for the 80% side of things. I think that is a perfectly good range to stay in. As far as, I don't know if there's too much in the way of cancer research to say one way or the other that I'm aware of, though.
Okay, great, thanks.
No problem.
Thank you for the very informative session. I was wondering if you would recommend to your patients or to anyone to go gradually into carnivore or suddenly, and also if that response would differ if someone is on keto versus like a healthier version of SAD.
I like the whole just jumping in head first sort of approach. When you're sort of quitting any any sort of addiction. Cold turkey has been shown to be a lot better. Now, there's some things, you're quitting benzos or alcohol or something like that. You can actually get seizures and die if you stop too quickly. You do need to wean off, but most things you can just sort of stop, and at some point you will. I haven't seen any problems with people stopping right away, and I think that it can be a lot easier for them to do that because once they get that idea in their head, strike while the iron's hot. They say, okay, I'm throwing out all this other stuff. I'm only buying meat. I'm starting today. It's going to happen now. Those people generally have very good success or more successful at this. The other people that say, oh yeah, I should, or I'm gonna wean it down, oh I still have 6 hot dog buns, so I'll just use those, and then we get, and then they, then they just sort of lose track of the idea and they never do it. So I like the idea of just getting in. There are people that say that, actually this might screw up your microbiome if you go in too quickly. I haven't seen that really myself in practice. But I'm sure that there are people out there that this could trip up. If you are going to do a gradual onset, I would give a very scheduled approach. I'm going to eat less here, and it's going to drop down here, and it's going to drop down here, and on this day, no more plans. But I personally like just jumping in.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
First, just want to say, since I went strict carnivore, my performance as like a power lifter and Olympic lifter is like insane.
Nice.
So it's been awesome.
Yeah.
Quick question: hoping you could like riff a little bit on testosterone and specifically free testosterone on a carnivore diet. There's like not a lot of studies on it,
Yeah.
But some people have like reported in their labs that like sex hormone binding globulin has gone up.
Mm-hmm.
So just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
I think everyone's sort of a bit different. I have not seen that. I have only seen positive results in the hormonal field of people's testosterone going up in by 30-40% in the first 3 months. Okay, and their binding globulin is actually staying at an optimal level. So I know there was sort of a thought about that. Oh, you have to eat carbohydrates or else this will get screwed up, or you need organ meats, or you need this, or you need that. I have not seen that, and I have not had a problem. And I know Dr. Saladino was having some health issues, and he was talking about this, and he was attributing it to not eating carbohydrates. But there is no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. That does not exist. Okay, so there are populations all over the world who have never eaten a carbohydrate for generations, going back millions of years. Okay, so if you're going to screw up your thyroid, if you're going to screw up your hormones, like you would have seen it by now. These people would not exist. And I've been doing carnivore at least a decade longer than Dr. Saladino has. I've never had that problem. You will generally increase your testosterone. You will also increase your testosterone receptors. So the testosterone that you have is going to be more efficacious as well. And again, this holds true for women as well. You optimize your estrogen testosterone levels. When you have high insulin levels, the insulin itself actually blocks the conversion of testosterone into estrogen in the ovaries, and so this is a major contributor to PCOS, which is a major burden in fertility. So when people go on a carnivore diet, when women do as well, it drops their insulin down to normal levels. Now their body can convert the testosterone into estrogen, and their bodies work a lot better. So any way you look at it, yeah, it's going to improve your hormonal health as well.
Thanks.
No problem.
All right, time for one more question. One more question.
Okay. I'm one of your YouTube followers, and I just wanted to say thanks for coming to Texas to see us. I know you traveled a long way.
Yeah.
But my question was, when someone is seeking to do carnivore, but they only prefer leaner cuts of meat, how do they get enough fat in to maintain high levels of nutritional ketosis for brain function and healing?
Yeah, sometimes it's a bit difficult. We're so conditioned to think that fat is bad, and even when I was sort of getting into this, I would still cut off the fat, even though I knew fat was good for me, cholesterol was good for me, and I had to catch myself like, what am I doing? I trust the research, I believe the science. Like I'm just going to, fat's good for me, eat the damn fat, right? And so, but it was. It was hard for me to do that. The texture was just like, oh, this is bad for me. And so I had to recondition myself. I had to take a little bit of a sliver of fat and I put it on a more lean piece of meat, eat those together. That actually tasted good. And I would just sort of do that and do that and do that. And eventually I could just eat chunks of fat, and it tastes good and I want to do that. So it's just a slow conditioning process. And so you just start eating a little bit more. You can melt butter into steaks. You can, if you have ground beef, you can just get a higher fat concentration of ground beef. You can go to a butcher. When I go get ground beef, I go to the butcher and I ask them to do 50-50 meat and fat. Tastes amazing, all right? And it's all mixed in, so it's going to sort of cook in together, and so you're not going to notice that you're eating fat. It's just going to taste really good. And so little things like that can start bringing up your appreciation for the taste of fat as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, I think that's my time. So thank you very much, everybody, for your questions, and I'll be around if people have other questions. Thank you very much.